You and your friends are arguing about the best flavor of ice cream. He says chocolate, you say vanilla, and obviously vanilla is the superior ice cream flavor. But your friend refuses to agree. He stands his ground, you stand your ground, and somehow a simple conversation about ice cream turns into an actual argument. And the funny thing is, at the end of the day, it really does not matter who is right or wrong. It is ice cream. But that is kind of the point. Sometimes the problem is not the opinion itself. The problem is how we handle someone disagreeing with us. Because in life, nobody likes being around someone who always thinks they are right. But at the same time, nobody enjoys being told they are wrong either. That's why arguments can get so messy. The second someone feels attacked, they get defensive. And once people get defensive, the whole conversation is not really about understanding anymore. It becomes about winning. You start thinking things like, why are they so dumb? Why can't they understand something so simple? How many times do I have to explain this before they get it? But when you start thinking like that, you are no longer trying to communicate. You're trying to prove that you're smarter. You're trying to prove that you're better. You're trying to protect your pride. You're trying to win an argument. And that's where a lot of us mess up. Because sometimes being right is not even the most important part. Sometimes the more important question is, am I actually listening? Am I trying to understand their side? Or am I just waiting for my turn to prove them wrong? You need to slow down before you react. When you are arguing with someone, it is important to slow down and actually understand their point of view. Try to keep an open mind. Listen to what they're trying to say and be willing to accept that you might be wrong. Because being wrong is not always a bad thing. Sometimes being wrong is how you grow. It means you learn something you did not understand before. But, having an open mind does not mean you have to agree with everything someone says. Someone can make a good argument, you can still disagree. You could also make a good argument, and they can also disagree. And that's the part people forget. A conversation does not have to end with one person winning. Sometimes it is enough to understand each other better without letting the conversation turn into a fight. Your ego hates being wrong. And I think this is hard because our ego does not like being wrong. When someone disagrees with us, it can feel like they are attacking our intelligence, our values, or our character. So instead of hearing what they are actually saying, we start defending ourselves. We interrupt, we explain harder, we bring up old points, and we start listening only for the parts we can argue against. And that's the point. The conversation is already lost because you are not trying to understand anymore. You are trying to survive the feeling of being wrong. But the truth is, being wrong does not make you stupid. Being wrong just means you had incomplete information. It means you saw one side of the situation. It means there was something you have not considered yet. And honestly, that is normal. Nobody sees everything clearly all the time. Sometimes you are too emotional. Sometimes you can be too biased. Sometimes you only know your own side. Sometimes you misunderstand what the other person meant. And that's why learning to pause before reacting is so important. Before you turn every disagreement into a battle, ask yourself, what if I'm missing something? What if they're not trying to attack me? And what if I care more about being right than actually fixing the problem? Because a lot of arguments do not get worse because the topic is serious. They get worse because both people's pride gets involved. And once pride takes over, even a small disagreement can turn into something way bigger than it needed to be. Understanding someone does not mean agreeing. That does not mean you should let people disrespect you. That does not mean you should agree just to keep peace. And that definitely does not mean every opinion is equally right. But it does mean you should learn how to disagree without turning someone into your enemy. Because being mature is not about never arguing. Being mature is knowing how to argue without losing respect for the other person. It is knowing how to say, I see where you're coming from, but I still disagree. It is knowing how to say, maybe I was wrong about that. It is knowing how to listen without feeling like listening means you lost. And honestly, that is something a lot of people never learn. They think admitting they are wrong makes them weak. But in reality, refusing to ever be wrong is what keeps you stuck. Because you always think you are right, then you'll never have a reason to grow. You never question yourself. You never improve how you communicate. You never learn from other people. You just keep defending the same version of yourself over and over again. But another part of maturity is knowing when an argument is not worth continuing. Because not every conversation is gonna lead somewhere. Sometimes both people are just too emotional. Sometimes the other person is not actually listening. Sometimes you're not actually listening either. Sometimes a conversation is just going in circles. And at that point, continuing to argue does not make you more right. It just makes both people more frustrated. There's nothing wrong with saying, let's talk about this later. I do not think this conversation is going anywhere right now. I hear what you're saying, but I think we need to take a step back. That is not running away. It is choosing not to let one argument turn into something worse. And honestly, some arguments do not even need to happen in the first place. Before you jump into a debate, ask yourself, is this actually important? Is it worth damaging the relationship over? Am I trying to solve something or am I just trying to prove a point? Because sometimes the most mature thing you can do is not win the argument. Sometimes the most mature thing you can do is just to avoid turning a small disagreement into a bigger problem. So the next time you are in an argument, just try to slow down. Don't just ask, how do I prove my point? Ask, do I actually understand theirs? And also ask, is this even worth arguing about? Because sometimes the goal should not be about winning the argument. Sometimes the goal should be to leave the conversation with more understanding than you had before. And sometimes the goal is to know when to step away before things gets worse. And if you realize you're in the wrong, it is not the end of the world. It is a chance for you to grow. So stop thinking you're always right. Not because your feelings do not matter, but because your feelings are not always telling the full story. Thank you all for listening to my ramble about life. If this helps you out, please leave a like and subscribe. Comment what you want me to talk about next, and I'll see you guys next time. Good luck in life.